you going there, peeps? Phil here from MTG Kiwi Philosophy here again, bringing you yet another deck tech. This time, this is my mono red Goblins. Yeah, this is a rotation proof deck. What we're going to do is we're going to go from our low end creatures into our mid range and then finish off with our spells and our combos. Alright, well, let's get into it. And of course, the first of our few creatures we're going to go with is 4 copies of Goblin Instigator. Now this 2-drop 1/1 Goblin Instigator is fantastic because when it enters the battlefield it also creates a 1/1 Goblin token. So this is really good for us. We can use it later on in the game. It's going to help us stabilize early and it's going to help us have board presence. Alright, let's move on to the next creature now, and we're going to go with 4 copies of Goblin Chainwhirler. Now the Chainwhirler is fantastic. It's a 3/3 4/3 and it's first strike, and when it enters the battlefield it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each opponent's creature. So it's really good for taking out all of those pesky saplings. It's good for taking out all of those pesky 2/1s and 3/1s that your opponents use early game. And it's also going to give us a creature that's really strong against the 4/3s because it's a 3/3 first strike. Okay, so let's move on to the next card, and we're going to go with 3 copies of Lightning Rig Crew. Now the Lightning Rig Crew is a 3-drop 0/5 Goblin Pirate that we can tap it and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's going to help us chip away at our opponent's life total. It's got good defense, going to help us stabilize the board, because one of the things that the Goblins are always weak at is defending, because they're a very aggressive archetype. Alright, well, let's move on to the next card, and the next card is we're going with 3 copies of Goblin Trashmaster. Now the Trashmaster is a 4-drop 3/3 Goblin. It also gives Goblins +1/+1, and we can sacrifice a Goblin to destroy a target artifact. So it's really good that we've got this card in here, because A, it's going to help us get rid of the Immortal Sun when people play it, and any other artifacts that are really tricky to deal with at the moment. The only weakness that this Goblin deck has is that it's not going to be able to deal with any enchantments, because let's face it, when does Mono Red ever have anything to deal with enchantments? But on the plus side, Goblin Trashmaster giving all of your Goblins +1s, it means your Instigators are going to be 2/2s. It means that your Chainwhirlers are going to be 4/4 first strike, which is really fantastic. And that means that they're going to be able to deal with some creatures that are going to be a lot harder for our opponents to get through us. And of course, that also makes our Lightning Rig Crew 1/6, which is even harder to get through. Alright, well, let's move on to the next creature. And that is 3 copies of Seige-gang Commander. Now the Seige-gang Commander is a 5-drop 2/2 Goblin, but when it enters the battlefield we get to create 3 Goblin tokens. And on top of that, the ability of being able to sacrifice a Goblin and it deals 2 damage to any target, which is really fantastic for us. Because if you think about it like this, the Trashmasters in play, all your Goblin tokens are 2/2, and then all of a sudden we can block and then and deal the 2 damage, or we can attack and then deal 2 damage. So there's 4 damage available there, which is really fantastic for us. Being able to sack it at instant speed as well is really good, to be able to smash in and just deal some instant damage to the face, take creatures out. It's really good. The Seige-gang Commander is really fantastic. Alright, well, let's move on to our last creature. Now, our last creature is not in sequence with the mana curve, because we've got it in our deck for a secondary purpose, and that is 4 copies of Guttersnipe. Now, Guttersnipe is a 3-drop 2/2 Goblin. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, Guttersnipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. So the fantastic thing about this is, even if we have multiples, the stack gets bigger. So with every spell we cast, the Guttersnipe deals 2. With every spell we cast, if we have multiple Guttersnipes, it could be 4 or 6. I won't go as far to say 8, because when do we really ever have 4 Guttersnipes in play? Never. But regardless of this, it's really, really strong for us. It's going to help us just, once again, chip away at our opponent's life total, especially with the likes of the Lightning Rig Crew. And also, this becomes a 3/3 when we have the Trashmaster in play, so that's going to help it be harder to remove. Although the magic number 3 is reasonably easy to remove with a lot of spells at the moment. Alright, well, let's talk about the spells we're going to build around the Guttersnipe, and that is, we're going with 4 copies of Doublecast. Now, the fantastic thing about Doublecast with the Guttersnipe is that we're already getting 2 damage off the spell from Doublecast. But once again, with the Doublecast happening, we're going to be triggering a spell twice. So this means that we're going to be able to get an additional 2 damage. So every time we cast Doublecast, when we play the spell, it's going to be 4 damage to our opponent. So we're going to look at playing spells that deal direct damage to the face or to creatures too, which is going to be really helpful for us. And we're going to start with 4 copies of Goblin Barrage. Now the Goblin Barrage works perfectly with our deck. It's a 4-drop sorcery spell with a kicker. If we sacrifice an artifact or a goblin, which we will have plenty of those, Goblin Barrage deals 4 damage to target creature, but if it was kicked, it can deal 4 damage to target creature and target player or planeswalker. And of course, if we have double cast this, it means, yeah, we got to sacrifice 2 goblins, but it doesn't really matter because that's essentially 8 damage to the face, plus the additional 4 that we're going to be dealing with the Guttersnipe. So on top of that, we're looking at 12 damage. That's a pretty massive hit. 12 damage to the face is severe for our opponent. Alright, let's move on to the next spell, and that is 4 copies of Banefire. Now, we all know how fantastic Banefire is. It's amazing once we can get to that magic number 5, and it becomes, well, you can't counter it. It's fantastic. It is sorcery speed, so there is that downside, but being able to double cast a Banefire is really awesome, because that's 2 spells that cannot be countered. So if we can get to, I think it's 8 mana, we play the double cast, and then we Banefire for 6, straight to the face. All of a sudden, we're looking at, wow, that's 14 damage to the face. It's pretty brutal, and late game, even better. Alright, let's move on to our last spell, and we're going to go with 3 copies of Lightning Strike. Now, Lightning Strike's in there for a little bit of early game, in case we're getting dominated on the board, and we need to remove something that's rather large. The good thing about Lightning Strike is it's going to allow us to be able to deal 6 damage to a creature or player, as well as the 4 damage to the face of our opponent. So what do? Do we deal 10 damage to our opponent's face, or do we deal 6 damage to a creature and 4 damage to the face? Either way, it's a good deal, and it's fantastic for our deck. Alright, well, let's move on to the next card. Well, the next card we're actually going to move into is our lands, and then we're going to get into our sideboard. Now, we're going to keep this real simple. We're going to just go with 24 mountains. Okay, that's it. Nice and clean. Let's move on to the sideboard. And the first card in our sideboard, we're going to go with 3 copies of Squee, the Immortal. Now, Squee is a 3-drop, 2/1. He is legendary, so we can only have one in play at the same time, but Squee the Immortal can be cast from our graveyard or from exile. So the beautiful thing about Squee is that he's going to be able to be pumped up by the Trashmaster. He's going to be able to be sacrificed by the Seige-gang commander, or sacrificed by the Trashmaster. So he's very versatile, he's very handy for us, he can block all day long, and we can just bring him back as long as we can afford the mana. Alright, let's move on to the next card, and that is 3 copies of Fanatical Fireband. Now, the Fanatical Firebrand is a 1-drop goblin, it's 1/1, it has haste, and we can tap it and sacrifice it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Fantastic thing about the Fanatical Firebrand is that we can attack early if we have it in our deck. We can go more aggressive with our creatures and less spells and try and get that early damage in. Now, the good thing about the Fanatical Firebrand is once it's served its purpose, we can sacrifice it and deal it 1 damage to the face, or we can sacrifice it to the Seige-gang commander and it's going to serve its purpose once again. Now, let's move on to the next card, and that is 3 copies of Volley Veteran. Now, the Volley Veteran is a 4-drop, 4/2 goblin. When it enters the battlefield, it deals damage to target creature equal to the number of goblins we control. So this is kind of handy because we've got the Goblin Instigator, we've got lots of other goblins that trigger lots of goblins like the Seige-gang commander, so we shouldn't have any trouble dealing damage to a creature's opponent. The plus side, it's going to become a 5/3 with the Trashmaster, and once again we can also still sacrifice it and it deals an additional 2 damage. Okay, well, let's move on to the last 2 cards in our deck, and this is just to be more aggressive. And I don't know if you've picked it up, but our sideboard is basically more about becoming a creature based goblin deck and not being so spell based, because being spell-based sometimes doesn't work. Sometimes you need to get the early damage in and just swing through your opponent's creatures and make sacrifices as we go along. And of course, these 2 cards are really going to help with that. And that is 3 copies of Trumpet Blast and 3 copies of Sure Strike. Now, Trumpet Blast is fantastic. It gives +2 to all of our creatures and at instant speed. So if we swing in with all of our goblins, Trashmasters in play, they're all 2/2s, they become 4/2s, and then all of a sudden, you never know, boom, we precast a double cast on that, and then all your creatures are +4. You're looking at some 6/2 goblins. That's some pretty gnarly damage going through there. And the same thing goes for the Sure Strike. Being able to give one of your creatures 3/1 in first strike means that we're going to be able to blow our opponents out, especially if we decide that we want to double cast a Sure Strike, because that's not the worst idea, but double casting a Sure Strike and allowing one of our creatures to blow out a massive one of their creatures, or just 2 of their creatures by giving it +3 and 1 first strike, because it's going to be really hard to deal with 5/3 first strike creatures or any other creatures that may be bigger in our decks. Well, that's it from me here at MTG Kiwi Philosophy. I'm Phil. I've hoped you like this mono red goblin deck. Go out, give it a try, tell me what you think, leave the comments below, smash that like button, share, subscribe. I'll catch you on the flip side. Ciao.